The polished mahogany of the conference table felt cold under my palms. A week ago, I sat here accepting the promotion to senior vice president. Now, my boss, Richard Sterling, slid a termination letter across that same surface. "Arthur," he said, his smile thin and predatory, "we're restructuring. Your position has been eliminated." The words were a physical blow. 47 years old, a career built brick by brick at Sterling Price Holdings, gone. He thought he'd won, that he'd cleanly cut out the old wood to make way for his incompetent nephew. He had no idea the axe he'd just handed me was double-sided. The ink on my new VP contract was barely dry, and so was the clause he'd clearly forgotten to read. I walked out of that office not in a daze but with a cold, clear focus. The Chicago skyline, a grid of steel and ambition, seemed to sharpen before my eyes. 25 years. I'd started in the mailroom, a kid from the South Side, with calloused hands and a mind for numbers. Richard's father, the Creole Mr. Sterling, saw something in me. He mentored me, treated me like a son. "Look after the company when I'm gone, Arthur," he'd said, his voice raspy in that hospital bed, "and look after my boy." I kept one of those promises. For a decade, I cleaned up Richard's messes, salvaged his disastrous deals, and propped up his fragile ego, making him look competent. I built the very division he now commanded, all for him to hand my legacy to Dylan, his vapid, yacht-obsessed nephew who thought EBITDA was a Scandinavian DJ. Richard Sterling wasn't just a snake, he was a fool who signed contracts without reading the fine print. And in the boilerplate of my new senior VP agreement was my salvation. And his ruin. My first real office wasn't much bigger than a closet, but it had a window overlooking the river. The elder Mr. Sterling, Henry, used to lean against the doorframe, a cup of vending machine coffee in his hand, same as mine. "Numbers tell a story, Arthur," he'd say, tapping a ledger. "Your job is to make sure we're writing a bestseller, not a tragedy." He taught me the business not as a series of transactions, but as a legacy, a responsibility. After his funeral, Richard inherited the title, but none of the character. His first major move was the Apex merger, a deal so spectacularly bad it nearly cratered the company. Richard was seduced by flashy projections and a charismatic CEO. He completely ignored the toxic debt hidden in their books. I found it, buried 3 layers deep in the due diligence he'd dismissed as boring paperwork. For 3 straight weeks, I practically lived in my office, fueled by stale coffee and sheer terror, restructuring the entire deal. I turned a company-killing liability into a profitable acquisition. At the board meeting, Richard presented my slide deck as his own, soaking up the applause with a smug grin. He never even said thank you. That was the day I stopped trying to save Richard from himself and started planning to save the company from him. Then came Dylan. He'd waft into meetings late, smelling of expensive cologne and last night's bad decisions, offering marketing ideas he'd apparently gleaned from influencer videos. He was a parasite, and Richard was the willing host. I watched as Richard began systematically carving out my responsibilities and handing them to his nephew. My team, my projects, my legacy, dismantled piece by piece. The final insult was the Kincaid account, the biggest client in our portfolio. Their contract was up for renewal, and they were threatening to walk because of Richard's erratic leadership. They trusted me, and only me. Richard knew it. "Land Kincaid, Arthur," he'd said in his office, dangling the senior VP promotion like a steak in front of a starving dog. "Solidify them for another 5 years, and the corner office is yours." It was a perfect trap. He needed my reputation to secure the company's future, and then he could discard me and install Dylan to manage the fallout. He was so focused on his checkmate he never saw mine. When the HR representative handed me the new employment agreement, my eyes scanned past the salary, past the new title, and landed on paragraph 11, subsection B. The executive severance clause, a golden parachute. It was standard boilerplate for C-suite and senior VPs, a relic from his father's era, a testament to a time when loyalty was valued. Richard, in his arrogant haste to set his trap, had forgotten it was even there. I uncapped my pen. He thought I was signing my career's death warrant. I knew I was signing his. I didn't drive home. The numbness that followed the firing had already receded, replaced by a white-hot clarity. My hands were steady on the wheel as I navigated downtown traffic, not towards the quiet suburbs, but towards the sharp, imposing silhouette of a law firm on Wacker Drive. Grief could wait. Revenge couldn't. Elena Reed, my personal attorney for 15 years, didn't bother with pleasantries. She was a shark in a tailored suit who'd known Henry Sterling and had no illusions about his son. I placed my new employment agreement and the termination letter side by side on her glass desk. "He made me senior VP on Monday," I said, my voice flat. "I secured the Kincaid renewal on Tuesday. He fired me this morning." She scanned the termination letter first, her expression impassive. Then she picked up the employment contract, her manicured finger tracing the lines of text. She stopped, and a slow, dangerous smile spread across her face. She looked up at me, her eyes gleaming with the thrill of the kill. "Oh, Arthur," she breathed, a hint of genuine admiration in her voice. "This is beautiful. He actually did it." She tapped the page. Paragraph 11, subsection B. The golden handshake, Henry's old loyalty clause. It only applies to senior VPs and above. Richard probably hasn't seen one of these contracts in a decade. He just handed HR the standard SVP template and didn't think twice. "What does it mean exactly?" I asked, though I already knew. I just wanted to hear it said aloud, to make it real. "It means," she said, leaning forward, "that by terminating you without cause within a year of your promotion, Richard has triggered a nuclear option. You are entitled to a severance payment equal to 3 full years of your new salary. It also mandates a bonus payout equivalent to the highest of your last 3 years. And the real kicker? All 25 years of your unvested stock options, they vest immediately." The numbers scrolled through my head, a dizzying cascade of zeros. It was more than a golden parachute. It was a tactical strike against the company's cash reserves. A blow that would be felt on the quarterly earnings call, a wound Richard couldn't possibly hide from the board. "He wanted me out of the way so Dylan could take credit for landing Kincaid," I said, the words tasting like ash. "He thought he was being clever." "He was being a Sterling," Elena corrected, her voice cold as steel. "Arrogant and sloppy. He saw the trap he was setting for you, but was completely blind to the one his own father left for him." She picked up her phone. "I'm drafting the letter of intent now. It won't go to Richard. It will be sent by courier directly to the chairman of the board and the entire compensation committee. Let them be the ones to ask Richard why he just set fire to several $1 million of company money to make room for his nephew." An hour later it was done. I sat in my car in a parking garage, the city lights beginning to blur in the twilight. My phone buzzed, the screen lighting up with a name I never thought I'd see again: Richard Sterling. I let it ring 3 times before answering, keeping my voice perfectly level. "Arthur." His voice was a low growl, stretched thin with a potent mix of disbelief and fury. "I just got a call from the chairman. What is this garbage your lawyer sent them? Is this some kind of a joke?" "No joke, Richard," I said calmly. "It's called a contract, a legally binding document, the one you signed a week ago." There was a choked sound on the other end, the noise of a man realizing he's just walked off a cliff in broad daylight. "You can't! The board will never approve this payout." "They don't have to," I said, savoring every syllable. "You already did, when you gave me the promotion." There was a long, strained silence on the other end, filled only with the sound of Richard's ragged breathing. I watched the distant headlights of cars on Lakeshore Drive, a silent, gliding string of pearls. The city looked peaceful from up here. "This is blackmail," he finally hissed, his voice thin and reedy. "No, Richard," I replied, my tone level, almost conversational. "Blackmail is when you have a choice. This is just accounting. Cause and effect. You wanted my position for Dylan. That was the cause. The multi-million-dollar severance package is the effect. It's simple math. I thought you appreciated simple math. I'll offer you your job back, he stammered, the desperation palpable. We can forget this whole thing. A misunderstanding. The offer was so predictable, so pathetic that a dry laugh almost escaped my lips. I smothered it. A misunderstanding? You looked me in the eye this morning and told me my position was eliminated. You handed my life's work to your nephew like it was a party favor. There's no misunderstanding that, Richard. I paused, letting the silence stretch, letting him dangle on the hook. Besides, why would I come back? To clean up your next mess? To watch Dylan run my division into the ground? No, I'm done propping you up. My father trusted you, he roared, his last pathetic gambit. That was the line. The one I'd been waiting for. Your father, I said, my voice dropping, becoming as cold as the winter wind off the lake, taught me to protect this company. He taught me that a man's signature is his bond. He would be ashamed of what you've become, Richard, using his legacy to enrich a fool like Dylan. This isn't just about the money. This is the consequence you've earned. I heard a sharp, splintering crack on the other end of the line, the sound of a phone being slammed against a desk, or perhaps a wall. The line went dead. I didn't smile. I didn't feel a surge of triumph. I simply took a deep breath, the air in the quiet car feeling clean for the first time all day. I had severed the final tie. The board would handle the rest. They would see the numbers, the sheer fiscal irresponsibility of Richard's move. His reign was over. He just didn't know how fast his castle would crumble. I started the car. For the first time in a decade, I was driving away from Sterling Price, not towards it. I was finally driving home. The drive home was quiet, the city's chaos fading into the ordered calm of my suburban street. My house was dark, empty. My wife passed away 3 years ago, and the silence she left behind was a constant companion. Tonight, however, it didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like a war room. I didn't pour a drink. I didn't turn on the television. I went to my study, unlocked the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet, and pulled out a single, thick manila folder labeled simply, Contingency. Inside was everything. A decade's worth of notes, memos, and emails. Copies of deal reports Richard had claimed as his own. A detailed analysis of the near-disastrous Apex merger, highlighting my specific interventions that saved the company from bankruptcy. A timeline of every key employee Richard had driven away, every strategic blunder I had quietly fixed. I hadn't compiled this file out of spite. I'd compiled it as a fail-safe, a final report for the board in case Richard ever truly flew the company into the side of a mountain. I just never imagined I'd be the one delivering it from the outside. I spread the key documents across my desk under the cool glow of a single lamp. This wasn't just about cashing a check. The money was the lever, the tool to pry open the boardroom doors and force them to see the rot inside. The money made me a problem they couldn't ignore. My legacy, Henry's legacy, demanded more than just a quiet, wealthy retirement. It demanded I finish the job. My phone rang at 10:47 p.m. The caller ID read, Marcus Thorne, chairman of the board, the old guard, a man who had sat at Henry Sterling's right hand for 30 years and had watched Richard's ascent with a quiet, weary disapproval. I had been waiting for this call. Arthur. His voice was a low baritone, gravelly with age and frustration. No preamble. I have your lawyer's letter. I've seen the contract. I've spoken to Richard, or what's left of him. Explain this to me. There's nothing to explain, Marcus, I said, my tone respectful but firm. It's all right there in black and white. Richard terminated my employment without cause after promoting me to senior VP. He triggered the executive severance clause. There was a heavy sigh on the other end. He says it was a clerical error, that HR used an outdated template. He's trying to claw it back. He can try, I said calmly. But my signature is on it. His signature is on it. It's a done deal. Elena is already filing the necessary SEC disclosures. A material event like this, a multi-million-dollar unplanned executive payout, the shareholders might have questions. Especially when the Q3 earnings report comes out looking like a crime scene. That was the first chess move. Reminding him this wasn't a private dispute anymore. It was about to become a very public, very expensive problem for every single shareholder. "What do you want, Arthur?" Marcus asked, his voice cutting to the chase. "And don't tell me it's just the money. I've known you for 25 years. You've never been just about the money." "You're right," I said. "The money is just a symptom of the disease. The real problem is a CEO who would authorize a 7-figure payout, knowingly, or even worse, unknowingly, just to install his unqualified nephew in a critical leadership role. The problem is a CEO who just cost the company a fortune out of sheer arrogance and incompetence." I let that hang in the air. I wasn't attacking Richard personally. I was framing his actions as a catastrophic failure of fiduciary duty. I was speaking the board's language. "The Kincaid renewal was the last firewall, Marcus," I continued, my voice low and urgent. "I secured it. But who's going to handle them now? Dylan? Do you think for 1 second that relationship will survive a year with him at the helm? We'll lose them. Then we'll lose the next one, and the next. This isn't about me being fired. This is about Richard finally becoming the liability his father always feared he would be." I heard the rustle of papers. He was likely looking at the very contract I had in front of me. "The stock options," he said, almost to himself. "They all vest. Immediately. That makes you one of our top 50 individual shareholders, Arthur." "I'm aware," I said, "which is why I'm not calling as an ex-employee demanding a payout. I'm speaking to you as a concerned shareholder with a significant stake in the future of this company, a future that right now looks incredibly bleak." This was the pivot. The strategic move. I wasn't the victim anymore, I was an owner. "What do you propose?" Marcus asked, his voice tight. "I'm not in a position to propose anything," I said, a carefully constructed falsehood. "But as a shareholder, I'd want to know the board has a plan to ensure stability. To restore confidence, I'd want to know that the person who made this colossal, financially reckless decision is being held accountable. I'd want to know there's a succession plan in place that doesn't involve nepotism and puts the company's health above the CEO's ego." I didn't have to say Richard's name. I had given Marcus Thorne and the entire board a clear, defensible, business-first justification for removing their CEO. I had armed them with the narrative they needed to present to the other shareholders. This wasn't a coup, it was a necessary course correction to protect their investments. A long silence followed. I could picture him in his own study, a portrait of Henry Sterling likely hanging on the wall behind him. "I understand," he finally said, his tone shifting from frustrated to resolved. "The compensation committee is meeting at 7 a.m., the full board at 9. Stay by your phone, Arthur." The line clicked dead. I placed my phone on the desk beside the contingency folder. I hadn't even needed to use it. Richard had handed me all the ammunition I needed on a silver platter. I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking in the silent house. My gaze fell on a framed photograph on the corner of my desk. It was me and Henry Sterling, 20 years younger, standing on the unfinished floor of the new trading wing. He had his arm slung over my shoulder, both of us grinning. "Look after the company, Arthur," he'd said. The promise was being kept. The board would cut out the cancer. And I didn't sleep, I didn't need to. Adrenaline, cold and pure, was a better fuel than caffeine. I watched the sun rise over Lake Michigan, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and fiery orange. By 7 a.m., as the compensation committee was meeting, I was showered, dressed in my best suit, and sitting in my study. Not out of hope, but out of readiness. The board wasn't deciding my fate. They were deciding their own. I had already sealed Richard's. The hours ticked by with the slow, deliberate pace of a ticking bomb. 9 a.m. came and went. The full board would be in session. I imagined the scene, Marcus Thorne at the head of the table, my lawyer's letter copied for each member, the numbers staring back at them, the cost of Richard's petty vengeance laid bare in a balance sheet. They wouldn't be debating the legality, Elena had made sure of that. They would be debating the damage. My phone remained silent on the polished wood of my desk. It was a test of nerve. Richard would be frantic, calling allies, making threats, pleading. But I knew the men and women in that room. They were pragmatists, not sentimentalists. They served the shareholder, not the Sterling family name. And I had just become a very significant shareholder. At 10:15 a.m., it finally rang. Marcus Thorne. I let it ring twice before answering, my voice calm and even. Arthur. Marcus, he said, his voice devoid of any emotion. It was the sound of business concluded. The board has concluded its emergency session. I'm calling to inform you of the outcome. I waited. The silence was absolute. The board has requested and received Richard Sterling's resignation effective immediately. He stated, each word a hammer blow. His nephew's employment has also been terminated. A press release announcing Richard's departure for personal reasons will go out within the hour. I felt a subtle release of tension in my shoulders, a knot I hadn't realized I was holding. It was done. I see, I said, keeping my tone neutral. Furthermore, Marcus continued, your severance, as stipulated in your contract, has been unanimously approved by the Compensation Committee. The funds will be wired within 2 business days. The company honors its agreements. I appreciate that, Marcus. This brings me to our second, more pressing matter, he said, his tone shifting. Richard has left a power vacuum. We have the Kincaid relationship to salvage, Q3 earnings to prepare, and a gaping hole in leadership. The markets will react to his departure. We need to project immediate and undeniable stability. I knew where this was going. The final, perfect irony. The checkmate I hadn't even seen on the board. The board has a problem, Arthur, he said plainly. We have a multi-million-dollar payout to a man who knows this company better than anyone. A man who just became one of its largest individual shareholders. A man who holds the keys to our most important client relationship. Leaving you on the outside, wealthy and disgruntled, is a bigger liability than Richard ever was. He paused, letting the statement land. It wasn't an accusation. It was a simple statement of fact, a business reality. We need a leader, Marcus said, his voice gaining a new weight. Not just a manager, someone who understands Henry's vision, someone the clients trust and the employees respect, someone who can step in today and stop the bleeding. Here it was. The board has voted unanimously. We want you to come back, Arthur, not to your old position. We're offering you the role of interim chief executive officer effective immediately. The words hung in the air of my quiet study, CEO. The title Henry had groomed me for, the one Richard had stolen. It wasn't triumph I felt. It was the crushing weight of responsibility. The sudden, shocking arrival of a destiny I had long since abandoned. I had set out to burn down the corrupt king's castle, only to find the board waiting to hand me the crown. The role is yours for as long as it takes to right the ship, Marcus pressed on. 6 months, a year, you name the terms. You will have the full, unequivocal support of this board to restructure, to rebuild, and to undo the damage Richard has done. You can finally run this company the way it was meant to be run. My eyes went back to the photo on my desk, me and Henry. He was pointing at something just out of frame, his face alight with passion. Look after the company when I'm gone, Arthur. Marcus, I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the storm inside me. Send me the offer letter. I'll have it couriered over within the hour. Don't bother, I replied, standing up and looking out the window at the distant Chicago skyline. I'll pick it up myself. I'm on my way in. The revolving doors of the Sterling Price building felt different. Yesterday they had pushed me out. Today they pulled me in. The lobby was a cathedral of hushed chaos. Whispers followed me like a shadow as I crossed the marble floor to the executive elevator. No one made eye contact, but I felt every gaze. They weren't just looking at a man who was fired and then rehired. They were looking at a ghost who had come back to haunt the throne. The elevator doors opened onto the executive floor. The first thing I saw was Dylan, frantically shoving personal effects from my old office into a cardboard box. He looked up as I approached, his face a mixture of shock and petulant anger. "You," he spat, a gold-plated letter opener clutched in his hand like a toy dagger. "What are you doing here? You can't be here." I didn't break my stride. I stopped at the doorway, my presence filling the space he was trying to vacate. I looked from the box of trinkets to his pale, panicked face. "Your uncle gave you this office," I said, my voice quiet, but carrying the weight of the entire building. "But he forgot to give you the one thing you needed to keep it: competence." I glanced at my watch. "Security will be here in 3 minutes to escort you out. I suggest you decide what's most important to you." I left him there, sputtering, and continued down the hall. His defeat was just a footnote. The double doors to the CEO's office were slightly ajar. I pushed one open. The room was grand, impersonal, smelling of Richard's cloying cologne. On the massive mahogany desk sat a silver-framed photo of Richard, with his arm around a smiling Henry, an image of a loving son and a proud father. A complete fabrication. I walked to the desk, picked up the frame, and without a moment's hesitation, opened the back and removed the picture. I slid the empty frame into a drawer. Then, I turned to the vast window, overlooking the city Henry Sterling had loved, the city I had promised to protect. The view from the top was exactly as I had imagined. Clear, cold, and entirely mine. Tell me about a time a boss's bad decision backfired and ended up being a major win for you.